Like maybe you're telling them something good that if they could figure it out would really help their movement. But if it doesn't actually penetrate into the body, it's just consuming attentional resources they could have available, just doing the skill without any cues. So it's easy to sort of then want to reject the verbal part of coaching almost entirely. But I think there's a huge difference between sort of framing and giving philosophy and giving a connected narrative around what you're doing and over cueing the actual skills.
You can find stuff if you're trying to think about the goals of your main sport or athletic, that sport or skill you're trying to train. If you think about the goals of those, then you can abstract a game from those goals rather than trying to just warm up through like lighter technical variations of the same technique you're going to be covering anyway. And it becomes a lot less redundant and a lot more fun.
That was Rafe Kelley and Charles St. John. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Simply Faster. I wanted to let you know about the Simply Faster Clinic, which is going to be hosted at Tony Villani's XPE Sports in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, May 21st, 2022. This clinic will feature Tony Holler speaking on track speed for football using a Feed the Cats approach, Les Spellman highlighting acceleration profiling for speed development, Tony Villani speaking on game speed and separation for agility, as well as Joey Garasio speaking on application of strength, power, speed, and agility to a team setting. To sign up for this clinic, you can go to simplyfaster.com, then their online store, and you'll find the clinic sign up under promotional. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Thanks for being here. Motor learning is a topic of human performance that has grown on me year to year to year. And honestly, even through this past year, has month to month been something that I am more and more interested in. How we learn, really, it permeates every element of a training program. It's not like we have skills that exist on one side in isolation and then totally isolated like strength on another side, for example. Everything we do as humans is a skill, and understanding the skill demands of any athlete and what is being asked of them for their primary sport, as well as any supplementary training, can really give us a better insight into the total coaching process. Today's show features guests Rafe Kelley and Charles St. John. I met both of these individuals in person at Rafe Kelley's Return to the Source retreat last year in Washington State. Although I've had Rafe on the show and talked to him over Zoom multiple times in the past, this was my first chance to actually meet and interact with his movement ecology in person. In the course of being there at Return to the Source, I also met Charles St. John. Both of these individuals are well versed in multiple aspects and arenas of human movement and skill and performance. Rafe is the owner of Evolve Move Play and has studied and taught a multitude of movement practices in his career as a mover and a coach. Charles has been training parkour since 2009 and coaching it since 2012. He carries multiple parkour coaching certifications and is a certified personal trainer as well. He currently coaches at APEX Denver Parkour and Circus facility in Colorado. On the podcast today, Rafe and Charles will speak on two different really main topics. The first topic, we're going to dive into their thoughts on different games and sports, using games as a donor or a really skill feeder into the main session, or just as a standalone in principles of having maximal fun and invoking maximal human components into that game. The second half of the show, we're going to be chatting all about multiple topics of motor learning. We'll be speaking on how Rafe and Charles set training sessions up to keep athletes in flow and maximize that flow of learning. They'll be talking on the frequency of cueing, how not to let words and overcoaching diminish one's movement quality, speaking on movement velocity, feeding errors, and much more. This is a really cool show, and there's a lot packed into this hour and 40 or so of conversation. It was great to chat with these two and to reconnect with these two after spending a week with them in Washington State last year. And I know you guys are going to enjoy this show no matter where on that coaching and movement spectrum you sit. There's a lot of really good information in here for everyone. Let's get on to episode 304. So, I was going to jump to the first question about motor learning and what were some of your influences in that world. But I thought it was interesting. We were just chatting about what's the best sport basically in light of parkour, human movement. I mean, I don't know, best is relative, but You guys have both mentioned a specific sport that you guys thought carried a lot of qualities and was just something that almost basically like all people should do, all kids should play. And I'm curious what that sport is and why you guys think that way. And then we'll get into the motor learning.
Well, Charles, I think you've actually described this and also described it in relationship to my work, maybe better than I have. So why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. So, I've played most of the team sports growing up that exist, but in high school, I chose to play rugby, and I would contest out of all the sports I've played that it was the best designed as a ball sport, competitive, athletic endeavor. It was the only sport I played that really allowed for a range of body types. Like if you're small and scrappy, scrum half, you're going to get in there. If you're big and burly, you're going to be part of the scrum. If you're tall and lanky, you can be a hooker. If you're light and fast like I was at that time, you're going to be playing out on the wing or one of the back positions. Whereas, contrast that to basketball where it's the taller you are, the better you're going to be at the game. There was just roles for different people. I also enjoy that rugby doesn't stop play very much, which really helps with, overall endurance, but as well as strength. There's this nice interplay of the range of both aerobic and anaerobic moments. I mean, you were mentioning it yourself, Joel, that there's parts where, your hands and feet, you're crawling, you're using your hands, you're interacting with other people as well as a ball. So there's kind of a light combatives elements as well as coordinated elements. There's just so much to it that I really enjoyed. And one of the icing on the cake was for rugby, the coaches are not allowed onto the field during the game. So your actual team captain is making decisions on at the ground level in real time. The coach is just up in a box, not being able to contribute until a breakdown at halftime. And even that little detail, I think, really kind of adds to the richness of the activity versus many of the other team sports I've played.
Yeah, for me, basically, I've been thinking about the avatar of the ultimate generalist mover for a long time. If you go back and read the CrossFit Journal 1, what is fitness? They offer this idea that, you should be fit across all the 10 athletic attributes like speed, power, agility, etc., right? Accuracy, you should have a balanced metabolic development. But the one that's really interesting is you should, if you had an infinite hopper of physical tasks, that best athlete is the athlete who performs best across all of them, which I think is a pretty good start. Personally, I would add, you should be best at the most important aspects of movement. There's actually doing Fran isn't that important compared to being able to defend yourself. So what are those fundamental sort of evolutionarily relevant things? And I think they show up in movement play, which is locomotion, moving through your environment, manipulation, being able to move an object around, and interaction with other people. How well do you move with other people? So team sports are interesting because they have all of those demands in them. All right. So if you're playing rugby, you have to manipulate the ball and you have to run, jump, move on all fours, and then you have to engage with the other players. And you have to do it in a team manner. You have to cooperate with other people. So you get some of this in baseball, you get some of it in basketball, you get some of it in football. Which of these is going to produce the best general overall mover? I like rugby because it has a contact element. And I think that rugby and football are really underrated actually as self-defense arts. If you think about, if you're in people think ambush in an alley when they think self-defense, but what if self-defense is you're in a big crowd and there's an explosion and you have to get out of the crowd? And what if you have to do it while helping other people get out of the crowd? Right? Do you want a jiu-jitsu black belt with you? Or do you want a bunch of linemen? Right.
Oh, and to that point too, rugby, you're also unarmored and play doesn't stop once you're on the ground. So, and you're not fighting for yardage. So you're not just training to take somebody down or avoid being taken down. You're also trying to get back onto your feet and back into a functional position. So yeah, I'm with you there. That's a good thought.
Combination of the free flow aspect of it. I think that I do love American football. I think there's some really interesting aspects about American football as far as how the vertical game opens up really intriguing types of plays to happen. But I think, especially for kids, having a free flow based sport as their base is really, really valuable. And it's hard to deal with all the stoppage in play that happens in American football. But you're gonna get all the cutting and evasion and being able to escape somebody. You're gonna get tackling. You're gonna get all that in this game, and you're gonna get the learning to coordinate and solve a kind of interesting problem with a group of other people. So that's why that's the base sport that I've chosen for my kids, to the degree that they're willing to do it. My son loves it. My oldest daughter is skeptical. She's preferring soccer right now. So, but you with your kids, you got to give them the space to choose the sports that they love too. But rugby is the one that I'm really excited about with my kid. He also plays American football during the fall season. But I was just out with him yesterday. I was walking around the field and I came back and there was they're under 8, right? He's 7 years old, so they're just learning to really be able to pass the ball. So they finally got like a string of passes to him out on the wing, and then he just carved his way through the whole defense and scored a try, right? Easily.
Nice.
And I was like,
yeah,
damn, that looks like fun. It just looks like so much fun. Like the way that a beautiful parkour line just makes you want to do it. That's the way. And like seeing all the, like making everybody miss, that just seems like such an extraordinary expression of athleticism. And if you can imagine that somebody had all the ability to move through the environment well that a parkour athlete has, and that ability to read other players, make them miss, right? Take contact, overcome contact, and keep moving, and the ability to throw well and catch well and do things with their hands, that to me is the ultimate athletic archetype.
I mean, like, kind of onto the main topic today, though, it's like the way you described rugby, it's like, and then knowing your son's hopping into American football, it's like it's going to be a good donor sport in that regard. And I mean, like, some of the most exciting parts of football and the stuff you were just describing is those like clock runs out scrambles where football just devolves into rugby anyway.
That's part of football is rugby.
Yep. Pretty, I would contest it.
Yeah, or with Tony Villani's recent episode talking about game speed and how a lot of times receivers or D-backs in football are trying to play basketball as long as they can, which basketball, again, a free-flowing, you could say donor sport to football. So it's cool to see that in multiple arenas. And I definitely get it with kids too. Even coaching, like I'm coaching I probably say it way too much on the show, but coaching my 5-year-old daughter's soccer team, like, it is all about holding those kids' attention. And I don't know what age. I mean, I guess kids around this area of Ohio probably start playing organized football at like 8. And it's to me, it's almost even hard to imagine. Like, I mean, I don't know how old your son is, right? But like the attentional capacity for, there's always a certain line. And if kids are doing something that keeps them in flow, that's like not something that adults don't have to intervene in as much, there's so much more learning going on. I kind of look at it almost even like like when I got into bodyweight isometric holds, like you do an isometric lunge for 3 to 5 minutes, and there's a lot of learning in that dense time frame compared to like 3 sets of 10 or something. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting that you mentioned that with rugby as opposed to when you learn these very structured sports later on.
Yeah, football seems like it has a very, what is the barrier to entry for a sport, right? That's a really important aspect of like when you want it in developmentally. So for kids, actually, like basketball is really hard unless you bring the hoop down. But like for a 6 and 7-year-old, dribbling and shooting a big, huge basketball into a hoop that's 10 feet over their head, like the success rate is so low.
Oh, yeah.
So I think basketball also teaches some really beautiful qualities. I love it. But yeah, I think as a base team sport, rugby has a lot to recommend it, especially as we're introducing kids into sport. And like I said, with football, all the set plays and like learning in routes and out routes and hook routes and all that, it's like, that's a lot for a kid to try and absorb.
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking of as you guys were saying this, and I will say, some of the coaches that I've had on have their own like kind of coverall game that they play before like a gym training session. Like before we lift weights, we're going to go play this game. And Kurt Hester is on. He's got Ghetto Ball. Pat Coyne's got Kirby Ball. Paul Cater's got Alpha Ball. And all these games are like a hybrid. They're different games. Like there's carrying, there's kicking, and then Jeremy Frisch talks about, I've heard him say this more than once. I love this because I have this picture of like playing this because I never got to play this tackle basketball. I'm like, you know what? Tackle basketball is probably about the closest thing to rugby of pretty much anything you could do, I think, on many levels. So maybe return to the source when we can tackle basketball. I was gonna say that log game at return, like, because I think too, like, with this is a multifaceted discussion. Like, one, it could be training kids and giving kids donor sports to play, but a lot of people listening to this, it's, well, I have a team, I maybe have a high school team, a college team, maybe even a pro team, and it's fun to see games becoming more and more accepted as the warm up, like universal games. Even just general games. I mean, I remember I went and hung out with Gil Reyes, who is a tennis, like, physical prep coach, trained Andre Agassi, and went to his facility in Las Vegas. And the first thing he had these tennis kids do is they're like, yeah, just go shoot hoops for 5-10 minutes and come back. Like, that was his warm up. And I was like, this is back before I met you and, like, you guys, and, like, started getting into any of that. And I was like, oh, that's cool, doing a game. Like, that was one of the first ideas that you could do a game. And then a few years after that, like, the men's tennis team at Cal, we were doing games almost every warm up, and they loved it. And sorry, I'm getting off track, but I wanted to, maybe you guys can talk about the log game, because I actually took that. So I went to Return to the Source, and that log game was literally the most fun that I think I've ever had in the last, 10 years. Like, it was so much fun. And not just that, because people will hear, oh, it was fun, but fun, like, if we're talking about outputs, like in the nervous system and preparing to, lift or sprint or whatever, like, the more fun you have before you do the outputs, the better your outputs are going to be. Like, I wish there would be a research on, like, just a canned, like, do this on the whistle, and then something that's fun and engages all facets of the human body and see what it does. And, like, anyways, describe the log game, because I think I've used something like that in my warm-ups after Return to the Source with, like, boxes, like, that were islands, and it was awesome. Kids love it. The athletes love it. So I'd be you guys talking about the game.
We call it King of the Course. And we actually just released a video of it yesterday. And there's a little blog post about it as well on my website. So it was cool. Basically, I hadn't really been able to do a lot of partner-based and game-based training for a while because of COVID. So we came into 2021, and it was like I had all these ideas that were bubbling forth in me about bringing those elements into the practice. And we're really trying to hybridize, really kind of like that avatar that we talked about. You should be a martial artist. Like, the fundamental kind of things that we think you should be able to do are martial arts, parkour, some kind of team sport element, and be able to manipulate objects, sticks, balls, ropes. Like, those are the fundamental kind of physical games. And so we're looking for not only, like, it's not that you should just be competent in each of those areas. You should actually be able to blend them. That's where I think we're going to create the most capable athletes. So we were just, as we were teaching that time, it kind of started coming out. And so the first thing that happened is we use a game called King of the Log. So you have two people stand on a log, and they try to off balance each other. And they start with just grabbing each other's hands and then trying to off balance each other. Then you can open it up and let them kind of, like, almost play a little bit of a sumo wrestling thing. But the thing is that once they're standing on the log, it takes away so much of their ability to produce force because they have to balance. So it really scales nicely for any group of people, and it teaches basics of grappling and striking, even with very little danger to the participants. So we wanted to hybridize that. So we said, what if the win condition isn't knock the other guy off the log? After you knock the other guy off the log, you have to jump and land off of the log on another log, right? So you have to get past them and jump to another thing. So that was the first iteration that came up. And then I was like, what if it was a whole course? And then we could think, you have a combative situation, but the combative situation, the advantage is determined by your competency and locomotion. So you have this course, and there are going to be better places on the course to try to win the dyadic interaction, which you can dominate by getting to before the other guy gets there. So then we were going to send people through the course and see who could get to the dominant place and then win the little grappling contest when they arrive there. And then we were like, well, what if we made it a team game? Now you have a whole group of people trying to advance one player on their team through the course and get to the end. So you have basically like two end zones where each team starts. Then they go through the course, and it's basically a hot lava course. And then every time the players meet, they're trying to outcompete each other to knock the other guy off and then move forward. But once we added the team dynamic, you have this thing of like sacrificing yourself to let the player behind you get a chance to play. And like we set it up so that there were like alternate routes through the course. So you could go and take somebody out by a different route to then set somebody else out to make a play for a goal. And it all kind of evolved very organically in the moment. But once it kind of landed, it was incredibly fun. And we just saw people light up, and we saw the teamwork aspect was really cool, and the power of the connection. So I could say more. I want to talk about kind of all of the things that you're getting from that game, but that's a good place to start with. That's what the game was. Do you guys want to chime in on that or ask any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Charles, you were on my team, weren't you? I feel like you were on my team on that game. Do you remember?
Yeah, I was for a good chunk. So like I remember the way that was playing out though. You had me, you as well, and there was like some people like
we had Steve.
You self-organized into your strengths to where it's like I can just, I can like running jump 8-10 feet onto an unstable log and be okay. So it's like I could skip ahead if other people that were more grappling oriented were going to be able to pull people away, as Rafe was saying, to those more combative areas of the course to where you could end. It was nice in that regard, in that it like allowed people to discover their particular strengths and lean into them, but then still have to occasionally face areas they're weaker in. But it's self-organized in the same way that like we were talking about with rugby or other team sports, that like based on height or like capabilities, you take certain positions on the team. And that kind of came up organically as well.
Yeah, I remember, I wanted to ask more about that, because it was something that, not everyone listening to this is necessarily, I mean, again, it'd be great if we all could go out in the woods and get logs and play this, because it was amazing. But like a lot of people, it's like, okay, what do I do with the athletes in front of me here? How do I create a greater experience, like a better warm-up experience for them? And for me, Rafe, I love what you talk about, like the self-sacrificing. And then Charles, you were talking about like the different ability levels. Like you win that game, we're like jumping on the rocks, where the big guys were on the main logs, like having battles, and like like rugby, like the smaller players have something they can do, the bigger players have something they can do. There's like self-sacrifice involved, so you have a greater connection with your team. And like Kurt Hester, when he was on talking about ghetto ball, he's like, the players like that more than they like football. Like they'd play the game and they were like just totally gassed, and they were all more about that than football, which is funny. I mean, because it's just so fun. And what I ended up doing after like probably August, go back to the gym, and I got a group. Actually, it wasn't even a group I was training. It was just, hey, there's a bunch of guys in the gym. I was like, hey, you guys want to play this game? And they're like, okay. So we lined up, and this was way more I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. This is like logs, pretty safe. Logs on sand, what is it? 12 inches tall, 14 inches tall. Like you're not going to fall too far. Like I had like 24-inch boxes. Like I basically had a big line of like 12 to 24-inch boxes down the middle of this 20-meter gym. And one box was like a base and the guys on the other side. So it's 3-on-3 basically. And we just ran at each other, hot lava style, ground is lava style. You get to push the other person off. And then I think we had a few sand bells like sitting on the floor that were like stones that you could land on. And it was so much fun. Like it was, if I was going to warm up for a lift or something or something else, that there is so much information, and it's just such it's almost like when you're thinking about the game to play before whatever it is the main thing you're doing, be it a lift, maybe even a team skill session, I think getting in the mindset, thinking of it as how can I create a donor opportunity for this? The same way parkour is a donor sport to other sports, or rugby is a donor sport, or soccer is a donor sport, and like how these other coaches have combined all these things. And I think the only thing that maybe some of those, like the other ball oriented, I should say the other coaches have very ball oriented donor games they use to warm up with. Whereas the log game, the king of the course, is like grappling. Like there is physical contact. And I think it's just really beneficial. I think that there's so many ways you could go with it. And I really benefited a lot from that kind of thing. I know I have a distance running group. It's basically running mechanics, strength training for distance. And we'll warm up with those types of games. And they like it. That's their favorite part. Like they're like, yeah, kind of excited about improving their running, but they're like really excited about getting to roughhouse, especially the girls. So it's like, being in the private sector too, it is like Michael Zweifel said, it's that for people to come back, yes, you need to improve them at the thing they're trying to get better at, but they also need to have a lot of fun. Like that's the thing they look forward to, is what they remember is actually the fun that they had. And for a lot of these kids, especially even kids too, who might not be headed to college for their sport, like that's I don't know. It really reshapes your perception on what was a great training session and what bases did you cover for the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think for like the listeners, that's probably one of the most relevant takeaways is like crafting something that can be a donor's like a donor activity to the thing you're doing. So like similar example, I've been assistant coaching partner acrobatics at our gym, Circus style, where you're like holding people up and throwing them around. And I found that using one of Rafe's games, which is clay sculptures, where one person is standing statically while somebody else manipulates their body into odd positions and they have to hold the shape without falling over, is a great donor to the activity, because flyers in partner acrobatics need to be able to hold tension in odd shapes, and bases need to hold their balance in also somewhat like oddly compromised angles with weird weights and different vectors. So yeah, you don't need sand logs. Like you can find stuff if you're trying to think about the goals of your main sport or athletic, that sport or skill you're trying to train. If you think about the goals of those, then you can abstract a game from those goals rather than trying to just warm up through like lighter technical variations of the same technique you're going to be covering anyway. And it comes a lot less redundant and a lot more fun.
To say, I actually got that game from Tom Wexler, who deserves some credit. Tom's an amazing coach. The mannequin game or the clay sculptures game. The thought that occurs to me is like, you're talking about a group like, okay, so they're distance runners, but they're probably not going to go to college for it, right? So I think you can think about the specificity of your training. Like you should be asking the question. I think I heard this quote first from the Adapt guys from Parkour Generations, but we train the human, right? The first layer that you're looking at is like, how am I making this person just better at being a human being? I think this is especially valuable and valid when you're working with groups who, like if you're working with an 8-year-old, like being like, I'm going to make this guy the best quarterback possible. It's kind of a ridiculous goal, because the likelihood that you can project his future till he's 25 years old and playing in the NFL when he's 8, it's incredibly low, right? But if you, like with my kids, I'm like, maybe my son or my daughters are going to do parkour like me. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to be MMA fighters. Maybe they're going to be whatever. I want them to have the most options available to them. I want to open those physical doors for them so that whatever they end up really liking, they can go do. Right? Like, I know how to become a competent mover in any domain. I have lots of physical strength, lots of resilience, lots of ability to handle training. My body's strong and healthy. Like I'll go do this. Like if that's what I'm suddenly passionate about, I can go do it. So I think that attitude of, yes, someone comes to you as a distance runner, but first they're just a human being and they need the things that humans need. And a big part of that is an enjoyable experience. And the enjoyable experience is actually so critical to the performance over the length of time. This is something I think we get so caught up in, like, okay, what is your block periodization? Or what is your wave periodization? It's like, that's great. But if the student is having consistently decreased enjoyment every time they come to see you, they're not going to stay. Doesn't matter how optimally designed it is to stimulate their cardiorespiratory system. When people are well mood regulated in their experience with you, and it's moving them towards something that feels really enjoyable, they're going to be able to give you more, right? They're going to be able to give themselves more. We talked about this warm-ups, right? Like people are always thinking about warming up the body, but it's like you got to warm up the brain and the emotions. Like you're going to have a better lift if you were laughing and playing and feeling a little bit competitive before you get to the lift, right? Imagine like you go into the gym and you just were stressed out and worked all day and you're tired and you're like, you just like get on the bike until your heart rate is a certain rate and you hit your body temperature goals. You walk over and you try to lift. Or imagine you come in and you play a ball game where you get your competitive juices going and you're laughing, you're having fun with your friends, then you go and lift. Like it's incomparable, the type of results you're
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll note on that, like, as I mentioned earlier, I've played almost every ball and field sport there is growing up. And the only sports I have stuck with are parkour and skiing, which are the two not ball sports and individual life sports per se. And that's because I I was in the era of like route drills and cones, and you would practice 4 hours a week to play half of a game on a Saturday. So it was like 4 hours to 30 minutes, like 4 hours of drills to 30 minutes of fun. And it fizzled me out. And I think I probably would have stayed with team sports much longer if they pulled the more bottom up, fun, social, and emotional elements and like self-organizational elements that skiing demands or parkour demands, or kind of more expressive athletics really do a good job of eliciting from the practitioners. And I think like kind of I think this maybe shoehorns toward, like, maybe directs us towards our main topic of like Rob Gray's work of like a lot of the motor learning material and like constraint-led approach stuff is more or baked in to activities, I would say, like skiing and parkour and other stuff like that. And they're baked into stuff like the log game, but they're not baked into the really stringent constraints of team sports or track and field or competitive sports like they could and should be. At least that's the way I feel about it. So yeah, I think you made good points there, Rafe.
Quickly, I wanted to let you know about the chance to try out Performance Herbalism for only a few dollars shipping costs and get one of Lost Empire Herb's flagship products, Pine Pollen, for free. Switching to an herbal emphasis in my supplementation has been a life-changing switch for me. Just as nature is by design balanced and sustainable, I believe that the more natural our diet and our supplementation is, the better. I love and use several Lost Empire Herbs products that boost not only my energy, but also my strength. These include Shilajit resin and the Phoenix formula. You could check those out by heading to lostempireherbs.com/justfly and grab 15% off. If you're on the fence about the power of herbalism, I have a great offer for you. You do pay a few dollars shipping, but you can get free pine pollen. Pine pollen is an herbal powerhouse that is a hormonal and energy booster packed with nutrition. It's actually part of the Phoenix formula. And you can get that for free along with the normal shipping fee at justflypinepollen.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Yeah, let's actually, Charles, you mentioned it. Let's segue into that, the motor learning. I mean, I love talking about the games because, I mean, again, it's just ever since that's been on my radar and, whatever Rafe, our first podcast was. And, like I talked about, like with the tennis experience, like that's been such a massive part of how I've changed things with how I go about a training session. So I love talking about it, but I also want to get into motor learning because I think you guys have a very unique, there's tons of parkour type individuals out there, but as per like the people who are usually on this show, you guys have a really unique skill set and experience. And I wanted to talk a little bit about motor learning. We'll jump to the question of, in a sport like parkour, or you could say even like rock climbing, for example, too, like there's a lot of different problems. It's not just one thing, like running the 100-meter dash. In the process of parkour, how often, or how do you find yourself coaching, I should say? If it's track, it's like, all right, we're going to work on your technique, like we're going to do this and this, but it's been talked about on this podcast before, Andy Ryland, like in youth sports, in early on, it's decisions. That was a good decision, like working on decisions. So what's the balance of like in coaching individuals in parkour, like decisions and routes versus actual technique and technical execution? How does that shake out for you guys' instruction?
You want to take that one first, Charles?
Sure, I'll take that first. So I've actually seen it kind of break down differently and vary depending on like age, training goal, and experience. So I think beginner adults have mainly been socialized to expect technique and want to break things down. So for beginner adults specifically, it's probably a 70-30 split between like technique versus decisions. But this is mainly because technique gives them a movement vocabulary, which like in the parkour context gives them like the parkour vision. So it gives them like comprehension of affordances in the environment, like as Rob Gray would say. It's like they'll see a ledge they can jump to if they know the technique of like, oh yeah, I can jump and land on something with my hands, like with my catch with my hands and my feet. Whereas it might not show up to their visual field if they haven't been refreshed on that climbing approach. But once you hit like the intermediate adults, then it's situational goals, it's decisions, it's run this course as fast as you can, traverse this gap however works best for your body, like flow through this space without stopping or stuttering for 10 seconds. And that's actually similar to how kids get coached, because they don't have the preconceived notion, at least in my experience. You have to hold their attention, as we were talking about with the sports. So it is goal oriented again. It's running the courses, playing the games, having fun. And then as they become advanced practitioners, that's where specific technique comes in. And the technique is more for aesthetics or to give them a new challenge to try and like coordinate their body. Yeah. So that's kind of how I've seen it show up with the various age ranges that I've coached, at least in getting the most progression out of the sport and the most comfort and joy out of the athletes.
Yeah. My experience has been interesting because I came into parkour as a gymnastics coach, right? So I was used to the very atomized kind of linear coaching model that they use in gymnastics and breaking things down into pieces. And that was my big advantage early on in parkour as a coach, was that I could decompose the movements in parkour much more efficiently than most of the other coaches who are out there. I could see component pieces and how athletes didn't have them. One of the kind of classic examples that I like to give is there's a movement in parkour called the climb up. So you have both hands on top of a ledge on a wall, and your feet are on the wall, pushing your body away from the wall. And you try to pull and essentially muscle up over the wall. Early on, there was very few athletes who could do this symmetrically with both arms pulling. And most athletes were putting an elbow on top and then going up with the other side. And there was a few guys who could do it symmetrically with both arms going up at once in the American parkour scene. It was particularly Ryan Ford, who was one of Charles's teachers, was one of the guys, Levi Muhlenberg, and Tyson Cheka, who was my old business partner. And what I noticed was, I don't know about Ryan, but I saw both Levi and Tyson tell people that they would push on the wall with both feet when they were going to do their climb up. But when they did the climb up themselves, they would drop one leg and drive their knee up. And I realized that what they were doing was essentially using the free leg as a kipping mechanism, like a kipping pull-up that that you'd see in CrossFit, or like a kip in gymnastics. And so I started teaching people that and taking it out of context. So I would decontextualize it and have people just practice the knee drive. Or I would have them do like catbacks, which is a skill where you're from that starting position, which we call a cat in parkour, you would jump off the wall to something else. So you'd step up the wall and jump off. So I started by building this system of like breaking things down into component pieces. And when I went to start, I had started in a gymnastics gym, and then we were teaching how to CrossFits, and then we built a custom-made parkour facility. When I started teaching people primarily nature, because that was where I was training, what I discovered was that a lot of the movements that I expected to have to decompose for people, and then to give them a lot of cues to get them through, they just automatically self-organized in the new environment. So I got really interested in the idea of how do we use the environment to guide the movement. So around that time, I was introduced to the I method. I actually first came across the idea of the I method through Matt Thornton from the Straight Blast Gym system of MMA training. And he talked about, you introduce a skill, you isolate the skill, and then you integrate it. And then within, the movement culture, there was Ido Portal's introduce, integrate, improvise, right? So we had that idea. But what I noticed was that what seemed like a better model to me was give the athlete a task to explore that is related to the skill that you're trying to achieve. Let them come up with what solutions they have, and then shape those solutions, if you can, by trying to change the task constraints. And then, if necessary, by giving them specific sort of conceptual understandings. So a classic example would be the step vault in parkour, right? So you're going to put one hand on the object, one foot on the object, and step through with your foot. Now, what a lot of people will do is they're not comfortable with the mobility of stepping through fully. So if we take a decomposition method, what we can do is we can put them on the ground and get them in that position and have them do the step through. And you'll see this happens in capoeira, it's in animal flow. MoveNat calls it a tripod step through, and you can spend a lot of time just on the ground working on that. What's interesting is it's actually harder to do on the ground, but it's not necessary, because given a low log in the woods, lots of people will just adopt this thing without ever having any instruction on it at all. So do we need to go through and like break down every piece of where your hand's supposed to be and how your fingers are supposed to be oriented and where your foot's supposed to be and how you're going to pull through? Or do we just want to actually manipulate the constraints such that it becomes the obvious solution? So we can do that. Then the next thing you have is that people will instead of stepping all the way through on the backside, they'll flop down with both feet 90 degrees from the direction that they began. And the constraint that you're often in is I'm teaching this vault, and then everyone's going to go back in line and do the vault again. In that case, that movement's adaptive because they're traversing a U. And so when they get to the end of the U, it makes sense to go back. But in the application of the step vault, very often we actually want them to be able to go straight forward. So we can tell them, I want you to take 3 steps out of it, or I want you to step fully down onto this leg. Or we can just put like 2 steps away, 2 strides away, a precision jump setup and have them do step vault, 2 steps, stride, or precision jump. And then you'll automatically see them start to organize a better pattern. Some athletes, that's not going to work. They'll organize somewhat better, but they won't get the full step through. Then you have a decision to make as a coach. Is it because they lack mobility and strength that you then need to go drill and build? A lot of times we think there are technical fixes and it's a physical problem. Or is it just like an awareness? And when it's an awareness, a lot of times what I've found is that athletes are kind of thinking of the skills as independent expressions rather than as having intention towards something. So what I like to do is teach principles before techniques. So before I get to here's why you should step your leg fully to the ground, I start introducing the idea of like having control of the rhythm of your movement so that each foot placement and hand placement is contributing to the overall direction of your movement. And then having control of the direction of your inertia. Are you moving? Is your movement taking you in the direction you're actually trying to go? And then your displacement. How far up and down are you going? And once people start to internalize the principles of flow, the technical refinements are often fairly obvious because they make sense and they're contextualized. But most of the teaching I see goes the opposite direction, right? You say, this is the right way to do the step vault, but the athlete doesn't know why it's right, which actually creates problems. So classic example that you'll see a lot in parkour is in a lazy vault, if you're trying to go straight forward. So in a lazy vault, you're going to swing your legs over an object. Well, you're going to post one hand and then swing your legs over the object. So the correct way to do that is to catch behind you with the free hand. So both hands push you away from the object at the end. This is correct if you want to go straight forward out of the thing, or if you want to turn towards the second hand. But if you're trying to turn in the direction of the first hand, swinging your second hand down is actually moving you away from your direction of travel and disrupting that control of the direction of inertia that you're looking for. But you'll see lots of coaches coach athletes that this is just the right way to do it. Right? Same thing. Sometimes people will do a step vault with the same side leg up with their hand instead of contralateral. And again, you'll see people tell them that's wrong. But there's lots of situations where it's actually adaptive in a course to step, reach down with your hand and swing your leg around. So if we use this constraint focus and principle focus before we dig down into the techniques, we're going to get a much more robust learning system in the long term. That's my philosophy around it.
Yeah. I mean, you would just say that's whereas the typical coaching philosophy that is it's almost more like masculine to feminine. If you ever even get to feminine, it's just all, mechanics, details, put your arm here, da-da-da-da. And then maybe let's get into some, like, I don't know, external cues or analogies at some point down the line, right? Like versus like, and this is, I guess, kind of how I go about it is like you said, like set up the environment first and explain, like, people know why they're doing, there's like an excitement and emotion, there's an environment and the body gets a chance to solve. And then it's like, okay, find the people who can't. And now maybe we have to go in and treat you more like a mechanic. I mean, in my world, a little bit more of like running, sprinting, jumping, I've gotten really into the biomechanics. And if someone can't run or jump in a certain way. There's a certain constraint I'm giving them, and they can't do it. It's like, okay, well, what's going on at your pelvis mechanically? What's going on with your femur rotation, your tibia rotation? What are your feet aligned like? What's your rib cage doing? Like then, okay, now maybe let's look at what about that in your structure is preventing you from solving this problem the way that the bandwidth, to get in the bandwidth I would like you to be at. And that's kind of like, that's how I viewed it, is you start with the constraints in the environment and, you know, hopefully it's exciting and all those boxes are checked. And then if someone needs it, then, okay, now for me, it's like more the skeleton and those elements. At least that's one of the first technical. I try to stay away from internal cues for the most part because those, you know, you've done shows with Rob Gray and things like that. But I mean, is that basically the same, you know, am I kind of repeating back to what you said maybe in a different way? Would that kind of be the gist of what you were talking about?
I think it's very aligned. And I do think that it's important, you know, I do think that we can go too far with the idea that you don't want to be mechanical or sort of technical cue oriented ever. I think there's really a point at which it is valuable, but you have to ask the question, like, so I'm training at a local Ninja Warrior gym, and there's a young guy who, it turns out, used to like be at the parkour jams that I organized 10 years ago. And he's like, oh my God, you recognize me. So then he's working on his front flips. He's like, okay, tell me what I'm doing on this front flip. And he's like, am I tucking tight enough, or am I doing this? And I was like, well, I can tell you what you did, or I can tell you what you should do, but that doesn't mean that on the next repetition you'll be able to do it. Right? There's a little bit more problem solving that goes into that. So how do we set up a constraint that's going to allow you to start expressing the behavior that you're trying for? Because telling someone to just tuck tighter during a front flip may work sometimes, but there's a good chance that it won't, right? Like right now, I sprained my ankle really badly in November. So I've been working it back, and it's, you know, I've gotten a lot of abilities back. You know, I'm pretty close to having like a 30-inch vertical, standing vertical again, but you can see that mechanically it's not right. And so I'm watching video of myself, and I can see that, like, you know, if you think about that, early stance in gait is externally rotated at the hip, right at the femur, and late stance is externally rotated, and the middle is supposed to be that where we go into the internal rotation and pronation. So, you know, we've had this discussion of like, we need that. We have to access that pronation. We have to access that IR. It's an important aspect of how we control movement. But there is a pathological expression of it where we go in too fast and we spend too much time there. And that does potentially predispose us to these knee problems. And so you can see in me right now that basically I'm collapsing into the IR position really fast. So like, think collision management. There's not a lot of eccentric control of that motion towards the internally rotated position. And then I'm spending almost the entirety of the gait cycle on that leg in that internally rotated position, very pronated and with my foot turned out. So I need to fix that. But how, right? You can tell me to turn my foot in or to, you know, like externally rotate your femur. It's not going to work.
It'll be a compensation. Right? You're going to compensate something they can't move.
Or you're not firing your glutes enough. Fire your glutes more, right? That glute medius needs to pull that hip out. So what's actually the constraint, right? So like, you know, we're trying to figure that out with me. And, you know, part of it is like one of the questions you talked about is like feeding the error, right? So we know that's there. So one of the ways that we're playing with it is like, how do I get more perceptual awareness of what's going on? Well, we're putting bands on my leg that pull me into that internally rotated position and forcing me to do tasks where I'm going to tend to destabilize that direction, but with enough control that I can get control of it, right? So that's one level of doing it. But what it looks like, the latest thing that I found with my physical therapist is that there seems to be like a physiological block on the lateral glide of my tibia, and I literally just need the therapist to go in there and open it up and then to return, right? So sometimes you literally it is like a mechanical problem. You have to go and get the mechanic to fix the thing. So as coaches, we have to be able to think in these levels of systems, right? Is it because the glute doesn't fire well, or is it because the tibia is not able to glide at all? Or is it because it's a habitual pattern that the athlete has and there's no physiological limitation? We just need to do some differential learning or feed the error so that they can actually start recognizing and having a kinesthetic mapping to control the position. So that's some of the ways that I am thinking about how we access those layers within coaching.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
And well, I kind of want to chime in on that because I took that method, that kind of inverse of the eyes away from you, Rafe. And what I found is like it allows me to go through those different levels much more efficiently and much more as needed as a coach rather than a long, prolonged, this is how we do it. And we work people through. So it's like my approach with a lot of skills recently is like pick the highest progression of the skill that can be failed safely. So with like a vault, have them vault over something that's maybe a little padded or something, or just have something soft on the other side. So if they're like, sand or a mat or something, to where it's like, if they fail the vault, they're not falling on sharp rocks, or like skinning their knee as they do it. But the cool thing about that is if I demo a vault, demo that progression of the vault over it, and everybody does the progression, we've just saved a ton of time that would have normally in the traditional model been spent of like 15 minutes of here's doing the vault on the ground, here's doing it without speed, now here's doing it with a slight jog, now here's doing it with a jog and then jumping to something. It's like, if you can just do it, then cool. We've saved 15 minutes. We can spend 15 more minutes keeping you engaged, having you have fun, and building off of where your current skill level is at. And then for like the 20 to 10% of students that aren't at that skill level, maybe, which is often what happens, that's where you can then see the part that's failing and then either go into the biomechanical models or go into like specific external cues or visualizations that might help get them to where they need to be with the rest of the group. And it's so much more efficient. I've saved so much teacher talking time. People get so many more reps and sets and like experiences in, because I mean, they're paying to be there to do the thing. They're not paying to listen to you talk. Like that's what podcasts are for, So
it is funny. It's like, yeah, even like private sector versus working at a university too. I mean, it's been mentioned on this podcast a few times. Like if you have athletes at a university, like they have to listen to you. You're the strength coach. Like they don't get to like fire you. I mean, I guess they could if they really didn't like you. Maybe they could talk to their coach and But like in the private sector, it's different. Like, and I do think there's an interesting line. Like in the private sector, some people show up and it's like, oh, aren't I paying you to coach me, right? But what if you can just go do all these things and you're just fine? You're fine. And I think that's maybe where the philosophy comes in. Like you have to build the story of why are we just doing this constraint? And I'm not necessarily, not holding your hand through it. I'm letting you go. And like, I think maybe that's where I just maybe I solve my own problem, because I think about that sometimes, like I tend to be very hands off unless I have to be, like you said, like there's the 10, 20% who don't get it. Let's step in. Maybe there's some some external cues, some variable learning, some structural things we have to go clean up. But it's maybe that makes that idea a little easier. Private sector, like, what am I paying you for? If you're just letting me go ahead and go ahead and just have at it, and that, being able to build the story of here we go, like this is why versus I think storytelling is that fits with that philosophy and that initial.
I think framing the experience. They're like we're talking. I think a lot of the talk in the motor learning world right now is like how much words can actually get in the way. Right. So we can be like, we're recognizing how much the way that we frame things, the way that the words that we use, how much they can actually just they can actually tell the athlete the wrong thing. They can get them to focus on the wrong thing, or they can just be unabsorbable. Right. Like maybe you're telling them something good that if they could figure it out would really help their movement. But if it doesn't actually penetrate into the body, it's just consuming attentional resources they could have available, just doing the skill without any cues, right? So it's easy to sort of then want to reject the verbal part of coaching almost entirely. But I think there's a huge difference between sort of framing and giving philosophy and giving a connected narrative around what you're doing and over cueing the actual skills. And I've found storytelling is incredibly powerful in motivating students. And just social interaction, right? You're there as a support, right? If nothing else, maybe you're their hype man while they're doing things. So you don't have to be like knees out. You can just be like, go, right? Just give them, or just to be like, that was awesome. That kind of stuff does matter to people. and your ability to really empathize and be excited about their journey, that's going to be powerful. Just tangenting back a second, one of the rules that we have with Evolve Move Play is based on what Charles was saying about like start higher in the skill development chain. Like, don't always try to descend to the lowest thing. Like, there is almost this strategy of like, we have to check off the function of every single joint in your body before you're allowed to try a movement. Do you have the prerequisites for big toe dorsiflexion and abduction? And then we'll let you sprint. It's like, this is impossible. You're never going to get anywhere, right? There's a point at like literally you could go down to the atomic level of a human being if you want to go to a deep enough level of analysis, but you're never going to be able to build back up from there, right? It's just way too complicated. So what our rule with Evolve Move Play is always train at the highest level of complexity that allows the adaptation that's sought for, because you're going to get more, right? Like, I can drop into very close to a split always. And I haven't trained it really ever, but I don't train it, right? I don't intentionally train it at all. But I did Taekwondo or Tang Soo Do when I was between 6 and 7 years old, and I threw thousands of head kicks. And then I did Muay Thai, and I just have kicked at people's heads a lot over my life, which requires that mobility. So I'm not saying that if someone's listening to this and a split is their goal, that's necessarily going to be the tool that gets them there. But my point is that something as high order as actually doing martial arts skills can give you mobility. But you could spend years trying to perfect your mobility and not have any functional physical athletic skills to show for it. If you can splits without having to do the splits, it's better.
So I was just thinking, it just got me thinking, Bobby White was just on recently, basketball skills coach and strength coach, and he was just talking about using velocity, increasing the velocity as a constraint for like different moves on the court, like, and that actually being able to clean things up. Just because, and it's funny, it goes with what Charles is saying. Like, it's like we're so regressive minded. Like, oh, you have to be able to do this little thing first, and then do this thing. And like having kids too. Like, I every now and then, it's funny. I took some physical education courses in my college coursework, and one of the courses that I wasn't excited about back then, but I love now, was motor learning. But it was motor learning from a PE perspective, and it was just like the stages of child development. Like, how does a child learn to throw a ball? Well, here's the first thing they do. Basically, they don't really turn their body. They just use their arm. Then they step into it. And every now and then, I was just videoing my son, who's 3, almost 4, throwing a baseball the other day, just because I am so blown away by how his body self-organizes. And it's like, I almost want to remind myself that this is the complexity that is possible at 3. Like, a 3-year-old can do the complexity. I mean, seriously, like, if you took his body and how he's doing it and just put it in an adult body, he'd probably be throwing 60 miles an hour. Like, there's a lot of complexity that we are innately capable of, and way more than I think that it's given credit for. And the other thing I was going to say is that, as you guys are talking, I've been thinking about this, is I think so much, if someone could just measure like the efficiency rating of a coaching practice in terms of like how much is just such a profound waste of time. Like, athletes, what I've learned is good athletes will be good athletes. Like, they will, the ideas they can accomplish in spite of. I'm always just thinking, well, how much time did they waste that they could have been doing something else? Or from a sustainability perspective, because I think wasting time doing minutia that's boring, or even like doing too much lifting because we want to make sure we're strong enough, and like going that extra mile just to make sure we're strong enough. Like, I look at some of those things as just taking, I don't know, it's just stuff that you don't need in there that kind of chips away at the session over a long period of time. That's at least the thought I've been having a lot recently.
Yeah, sometimes I think about that Allen Iverson quote, practice. We're talking about practice, right? Like, there is a point where it's too much, right? And we valorize the Kobe Bryants, right? Because it's a Protestant work ethic culture. And we don't realize that there are maybe temperamental and physiological reasons why someone like Kobe Bryant thrives on what he's doing and why Allen Iverson might not, right? It's not necessarily that if you take an Allen Iverson and you make him do what Kobe did, he would be way better than he was. He probably could have used more discipline, right? But he might have not been so far from the optimal strategy for him. You have to think about the fact that he's like 160 pounds, incredibly explosive, throwing himself against all these giants in the paint every night, and think, okay, how much extra practice could his body handle versus Kobe's, who's 6'7" and 210, right? 220 probably by the end of his career. It's a very different type of body, you know? And I think Kobe was more naturally aerobic, whereas I think Allen Iverson was very much like a fast twitch individual, which also, you know, has to do with how much, you know, kind of load you can put on that system and expect it to respond well to. So I don't know if that was totally a tangent there, but we do have to think about these things. And I guess the other one that was popping in my head was, have you ever worked, or have you run into Mike Cunliffe?
Yeah, I know, sprint coach. I know you trained with him in the past.
Yeah. You know, so he has a pretty good record. You know, his daughter was 6-time national champion, I think, in her age class. And that year, one of the athletes who was sprinting with us, Tatum Taylor, I think, was like the fourth fastest 16-year-old in the country, ran like a 10:33. So he's got some really fast athletes he's worked with. But what I was shocked about with practicing with him is he just didn't manage much. Like, there was a lot of the practice that was literally just like the kids standing around being social, right? Because you know, he was really big on, he was a, you know, short to long coach, you know, super long rest periods. So it's like for every 10 yards that you sprinted, you rested for a minute, right? So when you did a 180-yard sprint, like if you do 380-yard sprints, that's your entire practice. and most of that practice is literally just the kids like messing on their phones and talking to each other. And he did almost no coaching in between the sprints, right? It was like the structure of the session was do this work and take these rests. And there was minimal technical cueing, and he produced these really, really, really fast athletes. I was like gobsmacked how little you needed to intervene with the athletes over the course of a session to produce incredibly fast athletes. So I think that's a lesson in the potential power of minimalism. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the optimal way to do it, but I think there's a real lesson for a lot of coaches who are anxious about whether they're doing enough in every moment.
Yeah. I find that more coaches, as I've met, are more anxious about, did we do enough? Like that is by far the dominating mentality versus being caught feeling like you didn't do enough. Like it's maybe you said Protestant work ethic thing a little bit too. I think maybe it's just wired in all of us. We always want to make sure we did enough, but to be able to go the other way from time to time to test that out, be like, okay. You know, I'll say too, like just quickly before you go, Charles, like I think that's like working with swim coaches for a while, and like the taper, it's almost like that's like where the inverse of all the training comes in. And almost always at the end of the year, you'd hear if someone didn't swim fast. And swimming is different than all the other sports. And like track, you might taper like a decent amount, but not a ton. Swimming is like, it's all about the taper, and it's a massive. I think it's to overcompensate for the psychological difficulty of swimming in a way compared to other sports. Maybe I've always thought about why is taper so much bigger than that, but like the coaches will then say if an athlete didn't swim very well, a lot of times like, man, I should have just rested him a little bit longer. I should have done less than that. You know, and it's like there you now get to see, you at least now get to live in this, okay, now it's less, now it's less, now it's less, and have that be a very intentional element of it. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Charles, I know you had something that you were going to say there.
Well, yeah. I kind of just wanted to summate all of that, which is like, you know, talking about what you're talking about earlier too, just bringing it all together. Like the more time the athletes spend in their actual sport or games or courses or like skill challenges, like you'll be able to see the more the specific things that need to be addressed will be highlighted. So this actually kind of like, you know, going to the, like, how much should I be cueing? How much sport should I be doing? I got a great rule of thumb, which I got from a tricking coach named Dan Perez, which he said, like, I try and avoid giving a cue until I've seen somebody do something at least 3 times, because like Dan Perez used a juggling example, oddly, he's like, if they're dropping the same ball every time, they're falling into a pattern, like a suboptimal pattern or towards the skill you're trying to achieve. But if they're dropping different balls every time, they're like, there's nothing to necessarily correct there because they're making their own corrections and probably just overcorrecting every single time. So in that regard, like it's just they're trying to organize themselves. So you don't need a coach yet, because even if you give them something, if they're doing something different every time, chances are they they can't even organize themselves around your cue yet because they clearly don't know what their body's doing. So it's kind of pointless. But then too, like if it's different every time, what are the chances that they'll do the thing you're going to suggest next time? There is a chance. You don't know. It's like probably, so like watching things play out and letting people play does make you do less. But the whole point is they do more and they get better. And then you can make the interventions that are necessary, not just doing the interventions for the sake of like imposing yourself and your role into the space.
Yeah, it makes me, what you said makes me think about when Rob Gray was on this podcast recently. I asked him about good variability and bad variability, or at least the topic came up. And that kind of makes me think about it, like the bad variability is where you kind of make the same repeated mistake over and over again with the same, like, I'm trying to remember how Rob said it, but I think that captures the gist of it a little bit. Whereas the good variability is the body's trying to adapt to different, or maybe you don't know yet what exactly the strategy is. But I do think there's something to be said about making the same mistake over and over again, and the level of bad variability that we now have to bring something in that can help the athlete, self-organize a little bit more effectively.
Yeah. And you'll only see it if you let them do the stuff enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Nick Winkelman has highlighted a study where they, I remember, I'm not sure if I heard him talk about this or read it in his book, but they looked at like cueing on every rep, cueing on every third rep, cueing on every fifth rep. And I think it was out to every 10th rep. They found that like every decrease in cueing increased the athlete's performance, right? Yep. And he talked about that as specifically as the idea that basically when you cue too often, you're going to be pointing the athlete's attention to basically noise, right? So if there is something about the way that I moved that wasn't right in this rep, but it's only ever going to show up in this rep, correcting me on that for the next rep is now devoting attentional resources to a problem that doesn't occur.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that, like, if someone's learning a Kong vault or learning to, do their block takeoff, and it's like their first exposure to it, they're going to generate a ton of different movement errors, right? Many of which are going to be ephemeral. They're going to occur one time. So if there's like 100 ways that it can go wrong, and you're trying to get the athlete to think about all of them, it's going to be impossible for them to devote the attentional resources. Whereas if you let the system solve for it, then you look for those suboptimal, basically, those local optimums, essentially, where someone gets stuck in a suboptimal pattern, but they can't get out of it because it's the way that they've organized, right? With my ankle right now, or one that I've seen is that when you teach parkour in a gymnastics gym, a lot of athletes will adopt a what's called a punch takeoff, where they push both feet into the ground when they're doing like a Kong vault, which is actually optimal in the gymnastics scenario because the floor gives you the rebound that you need your legs to give you outdoors. So that's a situation where it's like you kind of have to cue and break the athlete out of that situation because they are actually optimizing correctly for the environment that they're in. It's just not representative of the environment in which you want the skill to be optimized for.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about. And yeah, I've said that study you brought up, Rafe, like with the 1 out of every 1, 3, 5, 10. Like I've ever since I heard that from you, along with the mental, like you think you're running faster, slower. I've alluded to that on this podcast a few times, and it was Kibwe Johnson with the Dow with the hammer as he goes by. It's like he said something that was just so good. It was basically like from the time that athlete starts that hammer throw, which is a singular skill. It's not like parkour or basketball. Like everything I say to them is going to take something away from the potential of that throw. And it's like it was in like, I don't know what verse it was in the Tao Te Ching. I was just reading this and it kind of stuck with me. I might have mentioned it on Bobby White's podcast, but like, or the one Bobby White was on, but it's like you have this container and it's an empty container and it's awesome. Like the container works, so the jar works because it's empty. And if I'm the coach, like everything I pour in or fill in that space, I am reducing the potential of that container for what it's meant to be. And so it's just like, I think that's not to say we never, do anything, but it's just like you want to really choose how you intervene carefully outside of encouragement and creating an environment, like you said, the philosophy. When we get into the more instructional elements, I just think we need to be really careful because we look at the athlete as that container, and how are we influencing that container? Are we taking away from their potential of what that movement could be?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you had Nick on. because like his book was incredibly helpful for me to where now when I do give a cue, I don't give people more than 2 things to focus on at a time. Most, like 90% of the time, it's one thing to focus on in a given cue as well, which again, my talk time is 1 sentence, which gives the athlete so much more time to actually train. And then that's where you can get those 10 reps in and give a cue. Is it's not like, oh, well, the person only gets 10 attempts and that's the whole hour, because if you're only saying 1 sentence, they can get 10 attempts in, and it's been 10 minutes. And then you can say another sentence. So you still can give value. It's just dispersed and succinct rather than upfront and heavy.
Yeah. I think the idea of attention as a resource that's limited and saying the athlete already has demands on their attention within whatever task that they're given. Is the cue that you're going to give them going to help them with organization sufficiently to ameliorate the costs of you actually demanding something of their attention, right? Like, I love the idea that, I think the schema that they use in like the ecological dynamics model of education of attention, intention, and calibration of action as the kind of fundamental things that we're achieving within motor control. I think it's a really, really valuable thing. When we talk about that idea of the cup, it's like the cup is like how much attention they have to give. At least that's one way to think about it, right? And so there's so much that's already going to be demanded in the performance of the skill, right? Some of that bandwidth is already demanded. So the more extra constraints that you're producing verbally on the athlete, the more potential you're actually now taking away attentional resources that they need in order to be able to concentrate on what they're doing. Like I've done this with coaches. Like I've worked with some folks who are great acrobats in the parkour community, and I've been like, hey, help me with this acrobatic skill. And when this huge stream of stuff comes out, I'm like, okay, I need you to give me 1 cue on this next rep. That's all I need to think about. 1 thing for the next rep. And that helps a lot. And I will do that with my athletes too, right? I'll give them permission. Be like, I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's such a great thing as a coach to be like, check your cues with your athletes. Just like they need feedback on their movement, you need feedback on your coaching. So you say, okay, you're going to do a backflip. I want you to spot that point on the wall as you do this backflip. Right? And you say, okay, did that feel like it helped you organize better? Was the skill easier to achieve when you tried that?
Yeah. No, I've used similar things, and I like to think of cues as like heuristics rather than like set in stone, like stone tablet laws. It's like, did it work? Did it get us to accomplish the goal, or did it take us further away from the goal? Both of those are good information, especially if you're thinking about verbiage and terminology. If you give somebody a verb and they're like push off the ground and all of a sudden they don't jump as high, then you know something about the nature of pushing is not what they need. So maybe you shift their attention to being like, reach your body towards the ceiling, something instead. And maybe they compress less and then they get more rebound, stuff like that. So, yeah, but like, that's the thing is I like that you check in with them on that, Rafe. And I've done similar myself to where like, I'll actually even remind a student where it's like, if we find a good cue, I'm like, remember that like staring at the wall, staring at the wall is what you need to do for this. Like just keep it in your head so that it's reinforced.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea of, that idea of educating the student to identify for themselves the cue that's actually helping them and to be able and have permission to reject cues that don't work for them is especially really valuable for coaches, for a lot of coaches who are like, if you're, the private sector like you are, and you're working with, high school team athletes, collegiate team athletes, there's a good chance that you're one piece of a team of coaches who are probably variable in competency. So if you can install in that student a way to respectfully sort of stay within what works for them and be able to like say, okay, yeah, thanks, but no thanks to that cue. I think it's going to help a lot with those athletes being able to sustain themselves through the kind of maelstrom that getting 6 different coaches' input can be.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Back to what you said, Rafe, like way at the beginning about like how it's the way you go about it is kind of the opposite. Like typical, it's like, all right, here's all these instructions and cues and fundamentals, and then maybe we'll get into some motor learning stuff if that ever happens. And kind of going with the principles first. It's interesting to me how many coaches are like, these are my cues for this, and like these are my, and it's like everyone's gonna get them. And it just doesn't. The conversation just doesn't happen enough. Like if anything, and I think part of that is like the mentality of I am going to coach these people. Like I am going to do it versus I am a facilitator. And as soon as you make the switch to I'm a facilitator, now it is a conversation. What did that cue elicit for you? Did you feel like it was helpful? I mean, I do think too, there's always a pendulum. I do think you actually can get too far into the field for some people who are a little more wired to like, look, I want something concrete. I want something tangible. I'm sure you guys have been through that too. I think that's always something too, because we can always run away from one thing and then kind of run too far on the other side too. So
structure does provide, structure does provide comfort for a lot of people for sure.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah, I've had this conversation a few times with, I've heard you have this conversation, Joel, too, as well, where like you're going to have these highly cognitive individuals who are going to want to really analyze everything as it's happening, and they're going to want to have like a big cognitive model of what's going on. They want to get everything that's in the coach's mind. They think that they're going to be able to have high achievement because they understand all the models of achievement that are going on in the coach's mind. And I think that there's a way to meet that desire in the student while also not overloading them when they're actually in the movement, right? So it's like you can talk shop in between reps, but you want to sort of clear their mind and give them that clear, simple cue before they go. You don't want them to, like, you can be like, okay, yeah, you have to, let's talk about ER and IR and compression and expansion, whatever it is, you just don't want them to try to hold all of that in their head while they're actually performing the skill.
Yeah, I think in the world of swimming, you almost saw both sides of that in the sense of there's athletes, and I was able to work with very high level swimmers. And swimming is an interesting medium because like you talk about the cup, and I feel like if you were playing like chase tag, for example, like that cup is pretty much completely overflowing just by the nature of what's going on. Like you couldn't do anything technical outside of it, just right with the environment. I mean, I remember playing Return to the Source, like playing chase tag in the stream with all the rocks. Like that was literally like the most information I feel like I've gotten in a small space of time. It was amazing. And so I'm like, yeah, there you couldn't tell anyone anything. But then you go down to individual sports and down to swimming, that's like 1 stroke per second. It's kind of slow. And based off of how someone's intaking information, some athletes, I've seen athletes trained to interact, just like Kibwe Johnson, the hammer, like this thing swinging around, you have to react to it. You can train athletes to react and intake the water information. And in the same way, like you take the information in parkour or whatever. But then it's also an easy sport to not think about that as much and just intellectualize the whole thing. And a lot of swimmers are that way. They're very academic oftentimes, and they like to take the intellectual approach. How many strokes? So where do I have my hand and arm? But it was interesting that pretty much all the elites, like the Olympians, they all were so like, they all had their self-exploration process for the most part. They all could tell me their process. Like it was always there. I mean, they were helped by the coaches for 100%, but pretty much without exception, those athletes could all tell you their own individual. It was always individual way that they had like explored and used, like, and swimming is so much like underwater kicking is so exploratory based because it's more sensory. Like you have to feel how your body works in the water versus I think we can, when you get on the land and you don't have that, it's just different. So anyways, all I was saying is it's a sport, it's easy to intellectualize, but as I saw it, the elites were always so good at their own process, like every one of them. And then a lot of the ones some of the ones on the college like level, not necessarily were like very much like, tell me what to do. I want you to tell me what to do. They had this thing where they wanted to be told where to put their limb or things like that versus just breaking through that and being able to explore in a healthy way. So it just made me think about that.
Yeah. How do you meet that need for cognition? Right. I really like, in understanding myself, kind of unrelated to movement, particularly, there's 2 psychological concepts that are like, one is epistemic curiosity and the other is need for cognition, right? So some people you have a craving to engage with complex tasks cognitively. So people who are into like playing Magic the Gathering or like really hard, complex video games, those are expressions of need for cognition, right? Or like math. Some people just get off on like, let me do really complex, figures in my head. And then epistemic curiosity is like how much you want to know about the world. So you can imagine that if someone is high in both of these traits and they come into a training environment, a lot of those people are going to go on the path towards coaching, but they're going to want to, one, like be mentally challenged while they're there, right? They're going to want to absorb all the information. And they're also going to be curious about how everything works. And so if you're working with an athlete like that, then you can give them lots of information. But I think the problem that you're highlighting is that the information can, a lot of times those athletes are the ones who later self-identify as not naturally talented, right? And they had to work hard and try to think their way through because they're trying to get information that's not actually that relevant to the performance of the movement, right? So they're often kind of awkward, robotic looking movers. So I think, like in my own self-description, I would say, I think I was quite physically talented, but my mind actually got in my way, right? And it took me a long time to like shut my brain down enough for the physical talent to express. So if I was going to work with an athlete like myself, what I would think is like, how do I get that athlete to have autonomy in getting into the sensory felt aspect, right? Rather than wanting to have all of that, how does the hand feel in the water, right?
Yes.
Right. So, okay, where should my hand be, coach? Like, well, that depends, right? It depends on the information the water is giving you, and it depends on the information the body is giving you. And what I need to give you isn't the perfect position. It's I need to help you get the right attention that's going to help you read the environment to get that information into you so that you can be adaptive in the situation. So that's the problem I think that we have with that kind of personality is how do we get them to be more focused on the perceptual information in the environment and getting on an autonomous relationship to it in the expression of their sports skill.
Yeah, it reminds me of I want to say his name was Bill Boomer. He just passed away. He was like a track coach who became a swim coach. I don't know why, like how, I don't know, but he like was really famous in motor learning because I think he brought this fresh view of motor learning from track to swimming. And one of the drills that I saw him doing, and actually I saw it being done on the women's swim team side at Cal, and this makes sense with the over-intellectual type person, is it was like one swimmer just pushes the other one through the water, and the swimmer has to find the line in the water. They're just experiencing the water as they get pushed. And like stuff, and it's like, how can we do, I mean, that's very, unique. It's the water, right? It's like not the land necessarily, but it also made me think a little bit about, and I do think that's good for the people who tend to be overthinking. How can I start by drawing in sensation, taking you out of the intellectual? I feel like games do that too, but I remember at Return to the Source, one of the things that I had a little bit of a hard time with, maybe it was a little bit of a fear, like a comfort level, but it was like the rock climbing day, because I've done rock climbing. I hadn't in about 5 years last summer, but it was like a speed wall. Like it was just a rock speed wall. It wasn't like a nice indoor speed wall. It was like a rock speed wall. And you're just like, yeah, just run and climb up it. It's like velocity is like, it's almost like by putting, and it was try to get up fast. It wasn't like try to take your time. It was run. Like those like I've seen a few videos like mountain goats just jumping up the mountain, and there's another like climbing variable speed learning thing. I'm sure they're not intellectualizing it at all. But like that was really hard for me to it was like a combination of fear, like I'm afraid I'm going to slip down too far. Where do I put my foot first? Then I watch the other people do it. But it's like there's not a coach there sitting. And eventually I got up it. And I think that I probably learned better because I had to like try it myself, watch other people do it, like think about it a little bit, but it was going fast, so I couldn't think about it too much. It's almost like the cure on some level is just do it faster and see what happens, And anyways, I like that. It made me think about that too.
Yeah, the speed thing is interesting. I was thinking about that when that came up earlier, because we often want to slow down and decompose things in order to do them and then build them back up. But what we don't realize is that the motor control strategies that are relevant at high speeds aren't always the ones that are relevant at low speeds. So there might not be a transfer. Franz Bosch talks about this in Strength and Coordination Integrated Approach. He says that and I don't know if this is completely true, but basically the transverse abdominis is the dominant, sort of spinal stabilizer in the anterior core at low intensity activities. But when you reach high intensity activities, it completely switches to the rectus abdominis. So you can be doing a movement at low intensity, and you're going to be relying on this muscle system. And you can educate that muscle system maybe as much as you want, but like there's a certain intensity at which it's just not, can't do the job anymore, and the other system has to turn on. And you can think about this as an analogy for any number of things that might be happening in the body. It's like you have to do it at the right speed in order to get the right organization. That's where the constraints come in, because if we take people out and we say, okay, do this Kong ball over concrete, and it like maybe has a sharp edge on it, there's a lot of organizational aspects that are going to be driven by the fear aspect, as you mentioned with running up the wall. And it can be hard for the athlete to get the right type of organization when there's fear there. So how do we as coaches do a better job of recognizing when the environment isn't affording the athlete the type of organization that we want? Right? Can we get them to play with more speed? Can we get them to be at a higher speed? Can we do that in a way that's actually safe for the athlete? Or are they limiting their speed because of a legitimate fear, right? How do we get better at manipulating those constraints to make sure that they're in that optimal position to learn the strategy that's going to be stable going forward, the higher levels of performance?
I mean, I think that's where kind of some of the differential learning stuff crops into, where it's just like, if you get enough variety in, you can see at what point and in what situations certain things break down or certain things improve. I mean, I've noticed this, especially with like training acrobatics. Like, obviously a certain amount of speed needs to be in it in order to complete a freestanding flip. You can't slow it down past a certain line. But the other thing with it is, the more momentum and speed you're carrying into it, the less muscle activation needs to occur, because you're just displacing momentum rather than having to generate it through your body itself. So the cool thing about that is if you're unsure what the student needs, or if they're like in our scenario we're talking about, where somebody's really in their head, and because they're in their head and over analyzing, they're internally focused, you can create different scenarios. You take them onto soft landings, or you spot them, or you take them onto like a bouncing surface, like a trampoline or an air track, to where you can remove certain elements that will get them out of their head, to where it's like, oh, okay, I'm really internally focused on the jumping mechanic of a flip, because I know my jump isn't good because I'm like flipping and landing low. And it's like, okay, you can tell they're internally focused. Their jump is not going to improve by them just repping and setting it, because they just keep thinking about what their legs are doing. Put them on a trampoline. Now they don't have to think about their jumping. Now, and then they can get the shape in the air. They can feel the extension. And then that's where the kinesthetic knowledge starts to come in, that then can potentially carry back over. And the way you find out if it carries over is you just keep throwing them in different scenarios and seeing which scenarios lead to the positive adaptations versus the negative ones. Or at least that's been my experience with learning pretty technically difficult skills like acrobatics.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about differential learning and like feeding error with acrobatics in particular, because I still have this persistent problem with turning gather step front flips into Websters. I've mostly gotten over it, then I sprained my ankle, and now trying to come back and do the skills, like my body's reverting in to the pattern. And I was thinking it'd be really interesting to like feed the error, like have something that's automatic, like have a band attached to that back leg, trying to pull it up, see how that does it. And I've been thinking about corkscrews and like, holding something in my hands as I do a corkscrew, or trying to kick something in the air.
I've been thinking about holding a foam block for corks myself.
There you go. Yeah. And then I also I really love air tricks. Like I feel like there's so many organizational things that are different about using a proper trampoline versus the ground, but the air trick is like a really nice kind of intermediate ground between those two. between those two things. It's like you can learn your cork on a trampoline, and then you take it to an air trick, and then you take it to the ground. But it's like you take the cork from the trampoline to the ground. It's like it's so different. The timing is absolutely completely different. Like it's just not the same at all. And the kind of stream of consciousness here is I was thinking about that in relationship to parkour and how I think parkour produces these incredibly robust movers because it has this immense amount of differential learning. But the problem is that I think that I've been having a lot of conversations recently with folks who kind of struggled with parkour, right? And were able to adopt something similar and then kind of find their way in. And I think that a lot of it is the constraints involved in sort of city parkour outdoors are really a high barrier of entry to most people. So it's like if you're a healthy, young man in the peak of your testosterone flush at like 17 years old, it's like you can bail on concrete 10 times and wake up and, not be that sore. Right. But, if you're not, it's like the orthopedic cost of learning in this environment can be very high, and you might not have the recovery to buffer it and get stronger from it. So I've been thinking about the role of like, how can we manipulate that environment better to open up the constraints in a way that's more welcoming to a broader variety of people.
Yeah. I love that. I just want to have a few quick thoughts on that because I know we don't have too much time left. Because this does tie back into, I guess, a theme of general human performance, general sports performance, wherever you are on the field is in. Maybe just looking at general locomotion, like I've used for bounding, for example. I've had some of my best experiences using like variable bounding as a warm-up, meaning instead of bound this way, here's a bunch of random ass cones, and you have to bound and your foot has to land next to a cone each time. Maybe it's single leg, maybe it's double leg, whatever, maybe it's left, right, whatever. Same thing you could do in sprinting. Take some mini hurdles, 4 or 6 inches tall, put them in. If your average stride is 2 meters, maybe it's 190, maybe one's 220, maybe one's 10, 150, and you have to use that to warm up or whatever. Like it's kind of like the parkour effect on a very low level. But I find that is it's invigorating because it's a problem to solve. It's not just, it's starting from a philosophical level on the day. It's not starting from a remedial level. Let's like do all the basics and then run. It's like, no, let's start with that. But I love what you said about the nature, because that's my thoughts on parkour before return to the source. And I'm always thinking, like, if I have a group of athletes and it's a team, like, am I really going to go out in the city and like start jumping? Like, no, like that's not feasible for anybody. But what if I have woods nearby? Like what if I have just a basic nature terrain features, or even like Tadeusz Starzinski, who wrote this awesome jump book in the 90s, like back in like that kind of like Soviet, like I guess East German, like Poland, like their jumps were just destroyed, and they would like do 200 repeats or 150 meter repeat sprints on like crazy terrains just because it worked well. Like I just love those ideas. So I like that you mentioned, because I'm always just trying to think of that variability and then getting into nature too. I think we don't get enough of that. And so I'm always just thinking of ideas for coaches just with any athlete population. Look, if you have any nature nearby, like for me, I'm always kind of scoping out, right? Like I could take athletes here and we would do this, or like even my own workouts. A lot of times I will go to a certain, like there's a loop. It's like a mile loop near my house, all these trees, and there's like a few fallen logs on the path. There's a few overhangs, and I'll do repeats on that. And I have to hurdle a few trees. I have to duck under a few trees, and I have to go up and down a little bit. And it's so much more. And I do it in like minimal shoes because the terrain's kind of rocky, and it's just such a better, there's just so many things built into that experience. Sorry, I'm just glad you brought the nature point, because I think that there's a point where we can all meet in the middle, whatever population we're in. We can't, if I'm coaching the college basketball team, coach probably isn't going to like it if we go out and start doing like big, huge concrete bench, jumped in precision landing on that bench. The center's like, it just wouldn't work very well. But I just find versions of this that anyone can do, I just think is really helpful.
Yeah, if we go back to the beginning of the episode and discussion of the king of the course, like what made it work well was the sandy beach and the round logs, right? Yeah. So there's no sharp edges. And when people get pushed off the log, they land on the sand. So nature has kind of inherently done that for me. And like I noticed the constraints, like we talked about the step fault. Like one of the big things about teaching people parkour in the city is sharp concrete edges and rails are scary. So people will have a harder time adopting a bunch of the self-organization things that happen in parkour if you're asking them to do it for the first time on a rail, right? There's fewer options for the average person in moving over a rail or a concrete ledge, concrete wall, than moving over a similar height, rounded tree limb that won't smack you down nearly as hard. And then also there's more variability, there's more differential learning that happens in the natural environment anyways, right? So, if you have a series of walls, they'll tend to have the same exact sort of profile that your foot is going down, or very similar. You have a series of rocks in the woods, they're going to have very different profiles. So you're going to get more stimulation of that when you move across it. But I think if we start thinking about it from a constraint approach, we can see that we can get some of those things that the natural environment provides by intentionally manipulating constraints more. The guys from Storer have started taking rock climbing pads out training. Pretty simple thing, right? Rock climbers do this every time they go to rock climb. But it actually changes what you can comfortably do and how you can prepare. And one of the classic things that we do in parkour is if you're going to do a big running jump, you'd run and jump in front of the object that you're going to. Sometimes this means that while you're sort of preparing yourself, while you're rehearsing, you're taking like a 6-foot drop over and over again from a massive run up. And that's just punishing on the legs. So if you bring that rock climbing mat out and you get to land on that every time that you're doing your rehearsal jump, it might not teach you the same thing mentally, but it can be much more sustainable on your legs to be able to work up to that jump that you want to do. And being able to think about the manipulation of constraints in that sense, I think could make the parkour practice more effective for people and more something that we could easily bring a broader population into.
Well, I mean, that even goes back to just the scalability thing where it's like, having 6-year-olds play with like adult sized basketballs, like it's more intimidating. It's more cumbersome. Like in the parkour context, outdoors, we can't move stuff around in gyms or in nature. You can roll a rock or you can put a log somewhere else. So I think in sports in general, the idea of differential learning is more of like how can you make organic progression and have like a bottom up, like self-actualized progression, to where like in a lot of my jumping classes in the parkour stuff, like I will set up a bare minimum jump that I think everybody can make and focus on like the control of it. But then, I set up 2 or 3 other jumps of varying degrees because, I've got students of different heights and different athletic levels, to where it's like people need to be challenged appropriately. But I tell everybody, try all of them. It's like, even if you can make the really big one, do the small one, because there's still going to be information to be gained from that and like fine motor control that you're going to want to have, because not every jump is your max jump. And I know like that's kind of a mentality that I think builds such robust athletes for like parkour or like in skiing or other like skateboarding and other stuff, is like when it's self-driven in that regard and they're deciding like the maximum efforts, minimum efforts working in the environments and what's afforded there, then they build more variability. They're more injury resistant. As Rob Gray talks about, they're more adaptive to new scenarios in different sports. There's more carryover. Whereas if you're always just focused on what's your maximum in like a very small and constrained setup of like a triple jump, and you're only triple jumping, like versus, doing 5-6 jumps in a row, you're limiting yourself, but you're also not getting as much information. And if you're starting out in an activity, it might just be straight up too intimidating to even try.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, pattern overload is a huge issue when you're trying to do those absolute maximal jumps, like triple jumps and high jumps and long jumps. Those are very easy to break athletes with.
Yeah. I think that's why the Ruzan study I mentioned a million times, where the different distances, where it was targets, you jump farther at the end than if you just went max every time. And I think maybe there's some correlation to how impactful the event is too, where you need to distribute it more. That's interesting. I mean, yeah, I know, Rafe, you got to get going here soon. And we've definitely covered a lot of material, guys. I feel like we kind of bounced around with the exact questions, but we covered them all in some way or another. I look forward to hopefully training again with you guys someday, and I hope everyone can get out and do a little bit of nature parkour after this episode. I'll definitely have to head out to the woods here again in the next day or two and get some of that going. So you guys, it's always inspiring talking to you guys. Thanks so much for being on, and it's great getting together again.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Talk soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed the show, the series, you can help us out by leaving us a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, whatever you're listening to. I totally appreciate it. We'll see you guys next week with another great guest.